what you said previously, and I missed so much.
Thank you. Yeah, you got to remind me sometimes because I just start going. And so the first thing with landscape photography is I want you to start focusing in on the idea that these aren't just random events most of the time. So where are you going to be? What time of day are you going to be there? And where are you going to be there? See if I can get it to progress. So even when we're doing things like the Milky Way, pre-thought went into this, where I needed to be, when I needed to be there, what was going to be in the foreground, and how I was going to frame it. Or something like this full moon coming up in Sevilla, Spain. I calculated this before I went home, before I left home. I knew where I needed to be so that I could get the moon coming up next to the cathedral spire. I figured it out on you can do it on an app, or I did it on a pen and pencil map. I kind of like paper maps most of the time. And then once I got there, I could see the serendipity of the boats going up and down the river so that I could get the boats to do something just a little bit different. Whoops, go back. Same thing with this shot of Mount Vesuvius in Naples. I plotted it out on a map and then figured out which one of the vantage points on the surrounding hills around Naples did I need to be at, and even ended up walking to each one of the various vantage points, and then figured out what time I needed to be there and when I needed to be there and all the other things. And so landscape photography, whether it's a cityscape or whether it's an astro shot or whether it's just a good landscape shot, has some planning into it of when you're going to be there and where you're going to be and what your field of view is going to be. And then, yes, go ahead, Raymond.
So how do you decide where, if you're not there yet, so how do you research knowing where you want it to be to get that shot? I mean,
so for instance, I knew that I wanted Mount Vesuvius. So this is Naples, Mount Vesuvius. So I knew that I wanted Mount Vesuvius in some sort of a twilight shot. So I, got my little map down and saw, well, okay, it's going to be hard as a twilight because the sun goes down in the other direction, in the opposite direction. Mount Vesuvius is kind of a sunrise shot. But then I thought, well, wait a second, that means we could get a sunset shot, not necessarily with Mount Vesuvius as a silhouette, but I could get a sunset shot with city lights coming on. So it could be a twilight shot. And then if that's the case, then what's it going to look like? And there are some apps you can use, like you can use photo pills. In my case, I just tend to like to look at maps. And I realized that there were some hills on the opposite side of Mount Vesuvius. And I had also read some of those ancient accounts where when the Mount Vesuvius was going off and burying Pompeii, the people over in Naples were on the hill looking at it happening. So that told me that there were some hills there. So it's that kind of thought process that goes into when are you going to need to be there? What time are you going to need to be there? And where are you going to need to be?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, is it possible? Now, there's also a really cool thing that you can do now, and that's Google Image. And so you can go anywhere on Google Image that you want to go. And Raymond, I know you were just in Yosemite, right?
Right, yes.
So you can Google one of those famous locations in Yosemite, and then you can ask for the images. And when you start looking at other people's pictures, most of the time you can figure out exactly where they were standing when they took that picture.
Okay.
Yeah. It's it's a overlook that's got some elevation, and it's an overlook that's down on the floor. Where are they? So there's some planning that goes into this, as opposed to just a random selection of being out there with your photograph, with your camera.
I found the app. Actually, my son found the app for me. He had a friend that's a photographer.
Yeah.
And he told me what app to get. And it told you, okay, this is morning shot. You want to be here, where to park and all this stuff. And
yeah. Which is very helpful. Very helpful. Yeah. It saves a lot of time. And then as you think about those type of things, where are you going to be when serendipity happens? So those of you that have been out to Big Bend, you know that Big Bend National Park, this is the window view. This is where we do sunset. But if you look at the sunrise through the window, you get the silhouette of the mountains behind you. So the silhouette of Casa Grande and the other mountain peaks behind you when it works out well. And so when you get that serendipity, because you are where you are and you've got the skills developed for it, then you're able to pull all this off. And so when you find yourself in a location that just gives you a little bit of surprise, or you find yourself in a location where everything just sort of pulls together, this is a beautiful mountain range in Romania, then you've got the skills that are necessary. And so that's why I suggest that you practice these landscape skills so that when you are in the right place at the right time, you've got the skill set that's necessary. So equipment needs, the things that you need. On your handout, I've given you that our medium wide angle lens is the 24 to 105 or the 15 to 85. Now, Lynette, I know what camera you're using. Dave, what camera are you using?
Nikon D7200
7200 full frame or crop sensor?
crop.
Crop sensor. Raymond?
The D850.
So the D850. So you're full frame sensor, right?
Yes.
And then Darlene, you're on the 7D, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So you're a crop sensor too. Okay. So Dave and Darlene, this would be your 15 to 85. And then Lynette and Raymond, this would be your 24 to 105. So this is your kind of medium wide angle lens. That's a basic lens, but then your super wide for the grand landscapes would be your 16 to 35, or Dave and Darlene, that would be your 10 to 22, just sort of a general idea. But you can also use your telephoto. So this field of view, for instance, would be with your 16 to 35. So you can get, you know, this big, huge, wide field of view, like you would move your head from side to side and move your eyes from side to side. But then that mountain range in the front is what's caught drawing my attention. And so if I use my 70 to 200 millimeter lens, I can still use that 70 to 200 millimeter lens as a landscape lens. So don't feel like you can't do landscape photography because you don't have a certain lens. It can be done with any lens that you use. And as we start talking about panoramics and some other things, you'll see that you can use absolutely any lens that you own. And then your tripod for, and this, excuse me, this is another telephoto lens where we get those compressed hazy shots going off into the distance. This is once again is in Big Bend. There we go, go back, sorry. And then this again, once again, is a telephoto shot. And so don't think that it's just simply one lens that we're using for landscape photography, because we can use almost any lens that we own.
And do these lenses have to have the vibration reduction piece of it, or does it, or not? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter as long as you're using a tripod, but most
Okay.
of your lenses have a vibration reduction. Now that 10 to 22, because it is so wide, you can save some money by not buying it VR or IS. And so, you know, you can save some money by not buying the VR or the IS. But I suggest you go ahead and buy it, because many times with landscape photography, we don't use a tripod, we're hand holding. And so if you've got the lens with the VR or the IS, I think it is a little bit better for you.
I have one more follow-up question. There's a feature on Nikkor lenses called AF-S versus AF-P. Does that make any difference?
It's AF-C and AF-S, right?
I have S and P, but I could have written it down wrong.
Okay. AF-S is autofocus single and AF-C is autofocus continuous.
Okay.
Raymond, you're using a Nikon, am I right? Or is there an AFP?
I'm not aware of an AFP.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Autofocus single is where once you focus on a subject the camera does not refocus if the subject moves until you raise your finger up and physically move your finger back down. AFC, when you focus on your subject and the subject moves or you move, the camera will refocus on the point where you focused.
Okay.
So on wildlife, if you're a Nikon shooter, you're almost always using AFC. Lynette and Darlene, that is our AI servo in Canons. Okay.
So on a tripod, are you on my telephoto? Should I leave the image stabilizer on a tripod or take it off?
Unless that tripod is absolutely, totally locked down, like we do for night photography, then I leave my image stabilization on. The only time I turn my image stabilization off is when we're doing night photography and we're totally locked down on that tripod with no movement at all. That's the only time I turn my image stabilization or vibration reduction off.
So why do you turn it off then? I mean, why, what's the reason to turn it off?
You're turning it off then because you don't want the camera to jerk, or you don't want the lens to jerk. And it's a microscopic jerk, but it's enough to make your star photography not sharp.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, in the old days, they used to tell us to turn off vibration reduction image stabilization because we were going to burn it up. And I don't know if anybody's ever burned up image stabilization or vibration reduction. So, you know, if it's a real particular lens, I mean, a particular shot where you absolutely positively don't want the camera to move at all, then you would turn off image stabilization. In some of our macro photography, we turn off image stabilization because everything's totally locked down. And so we don't want that little minute jerk from the lens. But the problem too, if I turn off my image stabilization, I forget to turn it back on. And then the next day I'm running around taking pictures and my image stabilization or vibration reduction is not on. So that's why I don't turn it off. The tripod that I've given you on your handout, I think most of you all already own this, but it's the MePhoto Classic Carbon Fiber Globetrotter. And this is one nice sturdy tripod. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It's very secure, even when I've been in the wind. And when we get into some long exposure landscape photography, then this tripod is really going to help you. And then Dave, you were mentioning where it's just not as sharp as you would like, then the tripod is really a good thing to have.
Okay.
So that tripod really, really helps.
I did purchase one of those.
Oh, good. Okay. That's good. That's good. Now
So
yeah, go ahead.
You know, I had trouble with my tripod at Block Creek.
Oh, yeah.
You know. So I was looking at someone, I was at Precision Camera, and she was telling me about a Siri, SIRUI or something like that. Anyway, but my question is, I really have trouble with the twist locks. Is there a reason not to get flip locks?
No, there's not a reason not to get flip locks. Some people like them better because they're just easier on their hands.
Okay, so does MePhoto come with any? No.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Mm-mm. No, so with that tripod, and there's a lot of brands that have become imitators of the MePhoto product. And so if you like it and if it seems steady to you, then I don't see anything wrong with that. I've never heard of it before.
Okay.
Yeah. But if
Kathy,
yeah.
I seem to have something missing from my camera to put it on my tripod.
Uh-huh.
My telephoto is perfect. I mean, it just sits there. But my wide angle lens or my short lens, I don't know where to put it.
You put it right. You put it right underneath the bottom of the camera, Lynette. See, there's a silver screw right there. And so all of my cameras have a base plate on them. And then my long lenses have a base plate on them as well.
Does the base plate comes with the MePhoto?
Uh-huh. You got one base plate with the MePhoto, but then you're going to end up buying some more. Yeah.
That's probably what I need.
That's what you need. And the best base plates, by the way, come from Wimberley, Wimberley,
Like
and
the town.
No, it's like the town, but it's spelled differently.
Oh,
But it's Wimberley, and the best base plates, in my opinion, are from Wimberley. You Allen wrench them onto the bottom of your camera, and they don't come loose. So if you buy the base plates from Me Photo, they'll eventually work their way loose. But the base plates from Wimberley do not come loose at all.
so it's just called base plate?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay,
And you just tell them you need a base plate for the model of your camera, and they have one already made for you.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well engineered.
Yeah,
I'm
and
glad I looked, because
Yeah.
then I'd be in Costa Rica and,
That's right.
Yeah, you
Thank
may
you.
want to get the base plate so you can turn it either way. You can turn your camera on your tripod.
Now that's an L bracket. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if it depends on whether you want to use an L bracket or not. Yes. Yes. I am now graduating to an L bracket, just simply because I'm doing a lot of horizontal and verticals, and it's become a lot easier with the mirrorless camera to do it with an L bracket.
oh, so you can put it this way or this
Uh-huh.
way?
Mhm.
Got it,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And remember, on things like equipment, email me tomorrow if you need a specific brand and model, and in case you need it. So
Okay,
camera settings on your landscape photography, metering, Nikon and Canon. So Nikon, I think it's your matrix metering, and Canon, it's your evaluative metering. This reads all the light throughout the frame in various sections, and then it has now gotten sophisticated, because all of you all are using the more modern, sophisticated cameras, in knowing which areas are really dark and which areas are really light. And so this evaluative or matrix metering system for landscape is just the best we've ever had. So technologically, this thing is just absolutely amazing. So it's reading all the light throughout the frame. Raymond's camera is reading it in 64 different sections throughout the frame. So not just 5 sections, it's gone on to 64 sections. So your matrix or your evaluative metering system is where I think we should stay for landscape photography. And then your f-stop. Now your f-stop is going to depend on what you're trying to do. So your f-stop controls obviously your depth of field. So that's your aperture, but we're calling it an f-stop because that's the number that you and I talk about. So your f-stop controls how much we see and how much we don't see in the scene. So if we want to maximum depth of field in the scene, then that's going to be your f22 or 32. I know that there's a lot of people on the internet that'll say f16 is better than 22, f11 is better than 22. I've tested it and tested it and tested it, and I don't see any difference or any bad reason to use f22 or f32. I just tend to go all the way to the max. And the way you can remember this is that 22 or 32, 22 things are in focus, or 32 things that are in focus. So the bigger the number, the more stuff's in focus. I think that in some old lenses that we didn't get sharp toward the end. But in new lenses, if you're working with a nice modern Canon or Nikon lens, then I think you're perfectly fine at f22 or f32. So that f22 or that f32 gives you maximum depth of field throughout your frame. Nice thing too with f22 or 32, or even 45, if you had a lens with 45, is that when you are stopped down, because the aperture opening is very small, so it's called stop down. When you're at f22 or 32 and the sun is in your scene, then you're going to get a starburst on your sun. And that starburst also gives you this beautiful creative avenue to go down. And so on my 16 to 35 millimeter lens, it has a phenomenal starburst on it. The Nikon 14 millimeter is just known for this crystal clear rays that come out in its starburst. So your lenses, many of these lenses that give you a really nice starburst are known for how many rays you're going to have. The rays that you have, the number of rays you have are all based on how many sheets are in the aperture. So if you're using a cheap lens, it only has 4 or 5 sheets in the aperture. But if you're using an expensive lens, it's got about 16 sheets in the aperture. And that just means that you get a lot better, clearer photograph. So that starburst is a beautiful thing that we can get at f/22 or f/32, depending on which one you're going in. Stop that. There you go. And you can play around with that starburst as long as the sun is partially peeking through something. So maybe obscured in this case by a little bit of a cloud. But when the sun is also in the sky and not obscured, then we can get a beautiful starburst as well. And so that f/22 or 32 gives you that ability to get that starburst. Have you all gotten starbursts in your photos?
Yeah.
No,
No.
Not yet?
Well, not yet. I'm working.
Okay. Okay. Now, by the way, the 10 to 500 millimeter Canon or the 10 to 400 millimeter, Darlene, I know you have the 10 to 400 millimeter, it stops down to f/45 and it has a phenomenal starburst. So even your telephoto lenses will give you a starburst on them. And so this is just, this is just a nice compositional element that you can play around with.
On my 100 to 400 lens, do I put it at infinity if I'm doing a big, like a shot like that?
No, you would still focus in your same where I want you to focus. We haven't got to focus point yet.
Okay.
But
okay.
if you put it at f/45, even looking at a sun coming through some fall leaves, it has a beautiful starburst.
Okay.
Yeah, just a lot of fun to play with that. And then to balance that light meter, we have got shutter speed. So even if you're shooting like I do, I shoot at aperture priority almost all the time. So when I'm doing landscape photography, then I'm setting my f-stop at f/22 or 32, but you still have to watch that shutter speed because the shutter speed stops movement or blurs movement, depending on what you're trying to do. And so if your objective is to blur that movement, then you're going to want to watch your f/22 or your f/32. And you're going to want to watch to see what shutter speed you're given. If you take your ISO down low, then you're going to be able to get that nice low shutter speed if you want to blur something. And on your handout, I've given you that f8, an 1/8 of a second is where water starts to blur. So once we start getting into that 1/8 of a second or slower, that's when we know that we've got water blurring. This is Norway, for instance, on one of the beaches. So if you know you want to get that water to blur, then your shutter speed needs to be an 1/8 of a second or slower. But if you're trying to stop something, so in this case, trying to stop the Aurora Borealis as it's dancing across the sky, then I'm needing a faster shutter speed. And then if you look closely at this scene, you'll notice that the stars are pinpoint. So some of you have done star photography already with me, and you know that the math formula is 500 divided by the millimeters of your lens as your starting point. So this is my 16 to 35 millimeter lens, and to get non-blurry stars officially by the math formula, I need 31 seconds, but I have tested that lens and really I need 20 seconds, not 31, 20. Because at 31, the stars in the middle are clear, but the stars on the edge are blurry. And so if I don't want any blurry stars, because the Earth rotating in this photo of the Aurora Borealis, then I also want to make sure that I'm paying attention to my shutter speed for this pinpoint stars, as well as stopping the Aurora Borealis. And so for this type of a shot, this is 20-second exposure, enough to stop the dance of the aurora as it's going across the sky, but at the same time, watching out for those pinpoint stars. So we've got to pay attention to these two numbers, whether we're shooting an aperture priority or whether you want to try to balance your own light meter. I'm not fast enough to balance my own light meter. I forget about it. So keep in mind what your shutter speed is and what we need for our shutter speed. If you're trying to freeze those waves crashing against those rocks, and I know we don't have many waves crashing against our rocks here on the Gulf Coast, but if we travel someplace where we got waves crashing against the rocks, then we know that that's going to need to be in the 2,000, 4,000 range for our shutter speed. So to get that shutter speed, we might have to compromise our depth of field. So, you know, there's this kind of balancing act that we're doing at any given time, trying to get as much depth of field as we possibly can, while at the same time trying to make sure that we've got the proper shutter speed that we're going for. So it's just like any other type of photography that you're doing, whether it's birds or anything else that's moving. In our landscapes, we do have stuff that's moving. So focus point, Darlene, this might be what you were asking me about.
Exactly.
So where do we focus? No matter what lens we are using, you have got to think about where you're focused, because the way depth of field works is it's 1/3 forward from your focus point and 2/3 backwards from your focus point. So your focus point, wherever we put the focus, we don't want it back here on this horizon line, because then we have 1/3 forwards and 2/3 going into the other country that we don't even see. So we end up putting a focus point in this shot, maybe right over here or even right over here, depending on how far away it is. So you want to focus 1/3 of the way into the scene. 1/3, so we've got 1/3 of our depth of field coming forwards and 2/3 of our depth of field going backwards. I like to use my bottom focus point. You know, we've got kind of a cluster of focus points through our viewfinder, and I like to use those focus points on the bottom row. And then since we have a lot of focus points now, remember 10 years ago, we had 9 focus points. And that was all that we had. But now we've got lots of focus points. So it's easy to focus right over here where my cursor is, or right down in here where my cursor is. But I wouldn't focus over on the C stack, because then I've got a whole lot of depth of field going behind it that I'm really ending up wasting. And so you need to think about where your focus point is going to be. And if you look really, really closely, you'll notice that this picture is blurred.
Kathy,
So
back to the one you just did.
yeah,
So when you're on those focal points, you don't do the one like you would do on a bird. What are you using? You
I'm
do?
still using one. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, because the cameras, no matter what, if we activate all of them, the camera's focused one spot. That's all. So
you're
I'm
just
choosing.
saying, so you're just saying you go all the way down to the bottom, you move your all the way to the bottom. Okay.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. Exactly. And then make sure where you focus, because if you look really closely at this nice little well-composed image with beautiful light in Norway, it's not in focus. And that's because my bottom focus point right down here is focused on something that's moving. So unless I also move my autofocus to one shot, Canon or AFS for Nikon, then my focus point is going back and forth as the waves are going back and forth. And as a result, I end up getting myself a blurred photograph. So in this one, you would almost need, because the water's moving and there's no place close to focus a third of the way in, you would almost need to manually focus on this one. But otherwise, I ended up with a blurry photograph. Questions on focus point before I leave that? No?
Kathy, I
Yes.
guess, okay, I guess back to my Yosemite question, you know, I was
Yes.
doing like half dome.
Yes.
So I'm standing on a ridge
Yeah.
across, you know, obviously looking over to Half Dome. Where would you focus? You would focus somewhere down, kind of in the
Mhm.
valley or hill
Mhm.
right down in front of me.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Or, you know, it can even be over on the sides. So if you've got mountainsides on either side, that are a third of the way in. You can focus over there too, because your depth of field is a flat plane. It goes from side to side.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the ISO setting, as we go through this, I mean, I know when there's a lot of light and bright sunshine, it might be 100 or something. And if it's a lot of shady area, it'll be a lot higher than that. That's another setting we need to keep in play, or at least be aware of.
Exactly.
Along with the other ones you just described, because that's going to change the dynamics too, right?
Yeah, and really with landscape photography, we're trying to keep that ISO as low as possible. And
Okay.
most of the time we're going to be able to do that unless we're trying to do something like stop those crashing waves. So unless we need that fast shutter speed, which isn't very often in landscape photography, then we would need to raise the ISO. But otherwise we can keep that ISO pretty low most of the time.
All right.
And landscape photography is where we need to pay attention to that histogram. It's important with our macro photography. It's important with our star photography. It's important with our bird photography. But in landscape photography, we really need to pay attention to that histogram. So if you look at this histogram, I've just taken this picture into Adobe Camera Raw. So when you're processing, you'll be familiar with this. You notice that the histogram goes all the way from the white side to the black side. And this is the same thing that we see on the back of the camera. We don't need the red, green, and blue histogram on the back of the camera. We just need the yellow one for your Nikons and the white one for our Canons. But we should see data in the histogram that goes all the way from the left side to the right side. Now, your left side is your blackest black, and your right side is your whitest white. A good histogram goes all the way across. I don't care how many peaks and valleys it has. What's important is that we have captured all of the tones in the photograph, because if we have not captured all the tones in the photograph, then we don't have everything to work with later on. So on the back of the camera, we need to pay attention to this histogram a lot in landscape photography. And we're not firing off 500 shots at one time like we might be doing with hummingbirds. So there's plenty of time to study the back of your camera and see what the histogram is. But that histogram needs to go all the way across. So once we balance the light meter and taken the picture, we might end up having to overexpose to get the histogram to go all the way across. But whatever happens in landscape photography, we need to get that histogram all the way across, because the white tones, the tones over on the right side, are the tones that we cannot recreate later on. And so we need to make sure that we've captured all of those possible tones. So watch that histogram, because that histogram is super, super important. And if you look carefully with this shot of the marsh, you notice how you can see all the detail in all these marsh grasses down here at the bottom.
Right.
And that's what we're looking for. You know, that's what we're trying to do with that depth of field of trying to get everything. And this is an F8, but probably, so I'm not going all the way back in there, but probably I wasn't going for what was all back in there. It's not a lot down there in that marsh anyway. Yeah. So I want to show you, because Raymond was talking about this with his Yosemite shots. This is the photo that came out of my camera. Now look at the histogram. You see how the histogram goes all the way from the left, all the way to the right. You see that? So this is the photo that came out of my camera. When I took it, I'm seeing that I've got my histogram all the way across. I've captured all my white tones. It's a little sparse.
Right.
So I should have maybe overexposed a little bit more because it's a little sparse, but it's okay because I've got my data going all the way across. And then when I process it, whoops, let me make sure. There I go. That's what the picture looked like. And so here's what came out of my camera. My computer's slowly, come on.
Yeah, because my pictures are, you know, I was really disappointed looking at the back of my camera, because I would take my iPhone and take a picture at the same time,
Yes.
And the iPhone picture, I said, wow, that looks
Yes.
really good. And I'm looking at my camera and going, okay, what am I doing wrong here?
Yeah. Yeah. Now
Yeah.
you got to remember that your iPhone and JPEG
Right,
are already processed. So when you're shooting raw, it doesn't look good until you go and you work on it.
right.
But remember that we can't take that iPhone photo and do much to it. Same thing with the JPEG. We can't take it and do much to it. It's finished.
That's true.
So this is how the picture looked on the back of my camera. And then, come on. Don't drag too much, computer. Come on. It's dragging for some reason tonight. I'm waiting for it to catch up. Still did it. There it went. Go back. So go back.
Yeah, it looks really nice.
So anyway, here's what it looked like. Let me go fast. And then here's what it looked like after I processed it. Now you notice when I processed it, it's got the texture, vibrance, and saturate, like I taught you all in the processing class. And then the exposure, which does the entire photo, has been brightened up just a little bit. The blacks have been brightened up just a little bit. But then that shadow slider ends up bringing all this information out. And so we just need to, when we're capturing that image, make sure we get the sky right. Because if we don't get the sky right, whoops, there we go. If we don't get the sky right, in this case, for instance, I've got that highlight indicator blinking right there. So on the back of the camera, this area right here would have been blinking at me. If I'm paying attention, then I should slightly underexpose to not have this area overexposing on me. I can go into software and I can try to recover as much of that as possible. And luckily it wasn't super damaging. And so I didn't lose a tremendous amount. But in that, if this area is way too bright, then there's nothing I can do to it later on to recover it. And so it's just a simple matter of making sure that when we're capturing these landscape images, that we get the sky right, the brightest areas of the picture right, and then we can work on those dark areas later on, as long as we captured all the information on the histogram.
Okay. One of the things I thought about, Kathy, maybe can you stack, like I went and I had it on tripod, I had a shutter release button, and I took a picture. And then I took like one f-stop, I shot it a little bit underexposed some more. And I was going to stack the pictures I thought about. So.
Yeah, and I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit, because that's a wonderful thing that we can do in landscape photography, especially when the light's too bright. So yes, there are times when we have to resort to that. And so this, once again, is just a before and after. So capturing it, making sure the histogram looks good, and then coming into processing later on, pulling out those shadows, getting everything looking like it should. And as long as we captured a good photo, we can process it later on. So I like to look at it as we're capturing the bones of the photograph. If we captured all the good data, then we can process it later on the way we want to.
And your sliders look like most of them are not too dramatic. I mean, shadows are like, this one here is 100%.
Yeah.
100. The rest of them are in the 20 to 30 range. So.
Right. So you see, I'm not overly processing this picture at all. Yeah. And, because I got the essence of it, but I knew don't keep overexposing to get that area in the shadows, because I can bring that out with the shadow slider.
Okay.
So we've got, kind of all those basic things. Now let's talk about our composition and how we're going to make our picture look like we want it, or like more like what we want it. The basic, ordinary, simplest composition is symmetrical composition. So symmetrical composition, the horizon goes right through the middle. We've got a sky, we've got a foreground. And so it's a simple, easy composition. This is Lake Mývatn up in northern Iceland during the summertime. It's still freezing cold by our standards, but it was summertime by their standards. But it's just a basic old ordinary symmetrical composition. So symmetrical. basic old ordinary symmetrical composition. So the horizon goes right through this little land formation in Norway. And then if we were to do it not right cutting through the little heart, then we might end up with something kind of asymmetrical. This one's not in focus either. Interesting. And then asymmetrical composition is when the top doesn't look like the bottom. So asymmetrical composition is when we start getting a little bit more off. So the top doesn't look like the bottom. I've got a clear bottom down on the lower part of the frame, but up at the top of the frame is all the pieces of the iceberg. So asymmetrical is where left doesn't match right or top doesn't match bottom. So asymmetrical is, symmetrical is the easiest way to go and the most basic, but asymmetrical is going to be a little bit more interesting. So top sort of looks like bottom, asymmetrical. So we're throwing this off just a little bit. And here I'm playing with textures. So the textures in the cypress trees and the textures in the rocks, playing with those repeating textures throughout the frame.
Did you take that in black and white or did you just process it black and white?
Processed it in black and white. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I would be kind of afraid to take in black and white, even though it's really being captured in color because we're just telling the camera to change it for us. Sometimes when I'm shooting black and white intentionally, I will change the camera setting to black and white, just so I can start seeing in black and white, because I don't see in black and white as well as I'd like to. So asymmetrical top does not look like the bottom. But then if you look at it, we've got almost a mirror image. So we've almost got a symmetrical image, but it's really not symmetrical, asymmetrical images. So asymmetrical become a little bit harder. Top doesn't look like bottom, but once again, the texture at the top maybe mimics the texture at the bottom. So asymmetrical image, but not exactly a symmetrical image. And then we get into this nice compositional element called golden thirds or rule of thirds. So whichever one you want to use it. Rule of thirds is where we divide the frame into 9 equal rectangles. So we simply just divide it into 9 equal rectangles. And then we put the most interesting element on one of those intersecting lines. So it would be right up here where my cursor is, or right down here where my cursor is, or maybe over here where my cursor is, or over here where my cursor is. If we pull the most interesting element in a little closer to the center, it's called golden thirds. But rule of thirds, where we divide the frame into 9 equal rectangles, you probably have a setting on your camera so that you can put the grid pattern on the through the viewfinder so that you can actually see it. But if we put the most interesting element either on this line right here, or this line right here, or this line right here, or this line right here, then that's where the human eye is going to enter. And then hopefully they're going to follow all the way around. Golden thirds and rule of thirds comes from the ancient Greeks. And so we've been seeing this ever since Greek architecture and art. But the brightest element in the frame is where the human eye is going to enter. So when you're looking through the viewfinder, you're thinking to yourself, okay, so where am I going to put that real bright church? What am I going to do with that bright church? So if I put that on one of the intersecting lines of golden thirds, there's nothing wrong with that. But then you have to look at all the other aspects of the frame to see how they're going to fit. And in my case, I thought bringing it in just a little bit so that then we had the orange tree down here, and we had a couple of other anchor points, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. We can pull them all together. So golden thirds is where we divide the frame into 9 equal rectangles, and we put the most interesting element on those intersecting lines. And then here
Kathy,
where
on
I,
that one,
yeah, go back,
on that
Darlene.
one, yeah,
Yeah.
did you focus, did you put your main focus on that church, or you still did a third? Okay.
Third of the way
Okay.
in. Yeah,
Okay, all right,
yeah. I'm just doing it as a compositional element.
okay.
And then here with the, in Romania, I've got, you know, where I'm putting this on the golden third, the monastery on the golden third. And because this darn tree is in my way, I've got to play around with this tree. Okay, so I can't move. This is where I have to be. And so how am I going to get this darn tree in my picture and still get this monastery in my picture? And how am I going to play around with all these elements that are in here? Because I can't move, I can't go anywhere. And that happens sometimes. This is just where we are. You know, there's people over in the other spot, or we can't get in that other spot, something like that. So that golden third is where we put those most interesting elements on those intersecting lines. It's where the sun is here, is on that golden third. So it's not smack dab in the middle of the frame. It's pulled off to the left or the right, or the left, right, bottom, or left, right, bottom. And then we're playing with all the other elements that are in the frame. In this case, the little boat coming across. So golden thirds is also a really nice way to compose your image. And then for me, with composition, if the sky looks good there, then I think we ought to include a heck of a lot of sky. So if the sky is just absolutely outstanding, then I don't think we need a whole lot of foreground. So that the landscape photo just has a little bit of the foreground, but it has more sky than anything else. And if the sky is good, then let's accentuate that sky and then de-accentuate the foreground. But if the sky is not that good, come on, computer, you can do it. Come on. There we go. There you go. If the sky's not that good, then don't feel like you got to include a whole lot of sky. And so with this one, I've got that foreground object that's pulling the eye in. And this also, the camera is not straight up and down. So the camera's not straight up and down like this. The camera is tilted like this with a wide angle, so that the wide angle is now distorted on the foreground, and it's making all of this area appear bigger than it actually is. You can do the same thing by tilting the camera back, and now the sky appears bigger than it actually is. So by using your super wide, your 16-35 or your 10-22, you can tilt it off axis and it makes the foreground bigger or the sky bigger, depending on how you're tilting it. Make sense? Okay. So when the sky doesn't look good, the human eye figures out that there's a sky in that photo. You don't need to show us the sky. You don't need to show us a whole lot of sky. So when the sky is not really, really good, don't feel like you need to show people a whole lot of the sky. When the sky doesn't have anything interesting or it's not telling the story, it's just a bland, clear, beautiful sky, but there's nothing in it. So don't show it because it's not really important. It doesn't have any puffy clouds in it, or it doesn't play any sort of interesting part in the photograph. So when the sky is not real interesting or isn't important to the photograph, then don't include a lot of sky, include more foreground. And this, with the super wide angle lens, I've taken it down into the blue bonnets. And then now I'm focused, you know, just right up in this area right here. So fairly close, those blue bonnets I'm focused on them are 3-4 feet away. So trying to accentuate those blue bonnets that are in the front and not worrying about all the blue bonnets that are back in the back. Questions on all these basic things? No, y'all good? Okay.
I assume you take it off Al Servo and just put it on one shot.
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes, especially when I'm focused on something. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I want you to get used to the idea of sitting at your scene and asking yourself, why are you photographing this? And what is it that's drawing your eye? And what are you trying to communicate? So why are you photographing this scene? Now, I realize if you were on something like one of my tours, that's because Kathy's plopped me in this place and said, this is where we're going to photograph for the next 2 hours. Okay. So why are you here? And what are you trying to communicate to people? So is this like me being raised in the desert? Anytime I'm around any sort of oceans or rivers, all I want to do is include oceans and rivers and running water in the scene. So are you trying to convey that? Is that what you're trying to communicate? Come on. It's popping through. Go back. There we go. Or is it the beautiful smooth boulders? Is that what you're trying to communicate? Or is it, you know, a kind of a combination of all of these things? So I'd really encourage you, before you start photographing a landscape scene, to look and figure out what are the 4 or 5 most important elements in that scene that are drawing your eye. What's drawing your eye to the scene? What's drawing your eyes? And sometimes, by the way, when I've asked myself what's drawing my eye to the scene, it's one area of splashing water, or one area of running water, or a yellow leaf with blue water behind it. Sometimes I'm looking at the grand landscape, but really it's a very tiny landscape that's drawing my eye. And a landscape photograph can be small stuff as well as big stuff. So when you inventory your scene and ask yourself, what's drawing my eye? What's attracting me? What am I trying to show my viewer? And then how are you going to get your viewer's eye to each item? So if you look at your scene and you inventory it as, this is my most important thing that I want to show, and this is my second thing, and this is my third thing, and this is my fourth thing. Okay, now how do you get your viewer's eye to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4? Because that's how you design your photograph. So once you start thinking about what your design of your photograph is, or excuse me, how you want to move the viewer's eye through the frame, and then you start looking at how am I going to move the viewer's eye through the frame. So this photograph in Big Bend National Park, I've got this massive, huge cottonwood tree that's got this yellow, beautiful yellow foliage on it. And let's face it, in Texas, we don't get very much nice autumn foliage, you know, so we got to take it when we can get it. So I've got this beautiful, you know, autumn tree, but then I've got this really cool sky at the same time with these beautiful clouds in it. And then I've got the Sierra del Carmen's off in the distance. Okay, so how do I pull all of these together? So what are my elements and how am I going to pull them all together to make the viewer move through the scene? So once you've taken that inventory and you figured out what are your 3 or 4 most important elements in the frame, then how am I going to compose this so that the viewer moves from here to here to here? Now, remember, the eye always goes to the lightest area in the frame first. And from there, it goes to the primary colors, the reds and the yellows and the blues. So here we have a lot of nice yellow and we have a lot of nice blue in there. But we've got that bright area, which is that mountain, that cloud over on the right-hand side. So theoretically, the eye is going to go over there, but then it's going to go to the yellow. So it's going to move around the frame theoretically. Okay. So how are we going to get people to go from here to here to here to look at what we want them to see? And how are they not going to leave the frame? So we're also hoping that they don't leave. So once they get into a landscape photograph, then we hope that they stay in there once they get there. Because if there's anything to distract them, then they're going to leave. The human brain's going to just wander away because we get distracted really fast. And so we have to think about what's going to bring them in and how are they going to move around and how is the eye going to move around the scene. So what's attracting you to the scene or what's attracting me to the scene? How am I going to compose this so that the eye of my viewer goes from here to here to here to here? Because if we don't keep people in the scene, then they leave us and then they quit looking at our photograph. So we have to take an inventory of what's attracting us to the scene, what are our elements we're going to play with, and then how are we going to move people around the frame. And on your handout, what I've encouraged you to do is look at the scene and then without the camera on the tripod, start composing because your eye sees what's equivalent to a 50mm lens. But as we move our head around and up and down, then that takes us to seeing like our wide angle lens does. But once you put that camera up to your eye, and you start zooming in and out to get rid of, a trash thing over here or a fence over here or a stray tree over here, then we figure out what focal length we can work with. And now how much of the sky do I show and how much of the foreground do I show and how much of the left do I show and how much to the right do I show? So now we're looking through the lens and figuring out what our composition is before we put the camera on the tripod. Or like in this scene, I had to climb all the way up on top of that mountain. And so I don't even have my tripod with me because I didn't want to carry anything other than that I didn't have to carry up there. And so this is one of those handheld shots as opposed to a tripod shot. And when we're looking around, then think about frames and anchors. So a frame, easy. Whoops, sorry. Frame, easy. Something that's going to frame the picture. So a branch coming in from the top, for instance, I can't do anything about that cypress branch on the Frio River, but I might as well go ahead and turn it into a frame. I've got these white rocks, so I've got to deal with those because those could easily distract the viewer's eye from the scene. I would rather those rocks not be there, but that's the way it is. So you've got to think about frames, and then you've got to think about anchors. So anchors are things like this cactus. The viewer can come in, move around, and the anchor kind of sticks us, just like a cactus would do. Does it act like an anchor for your eye? Does the cactus act like an anchor?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So an anchor can be big or an anchor can be small. An anchor does not have to be any specific size. But what you're thinking about is that place where we can maybe, I look at it as enter, move around, and then kind of a gate protector not to let the viewer leave the scene. So maybe that anchor just kind of keeps us in there, keeps that viewer in there just a little bit. Come on. It's moving. There we go. Another cactus as an anchor. Okay. So that, kind of that greenish hue tucked up against all that other stuff. And so this now becomes my anchor. If you notice, the anchor is also on the golden third. You see how it's on the golden third? And so positioning it there, otherwise it's just a lot of rocks. But if you position that, I think if you position that anchor there, then it puts us more in context. What do you think? Does it work
Yeah,
for you?
definitely. Yeah,
Yes.
Okay, frames, anchors, composition, questions? Y'all good? Okay. So filters, what filters do you own?
I don't.
Don't? Okay.
I do.
You told me to get this one.
The polarizer, right, Lynette?
You told me to get the Stingray.
Yeah.
I have the same thing. LB neutral circular.
LB light bright nuclear circuit. Aha, y'all are good. How about
I
you,
did too.
Darlene?
that's
do you
what I
have?
got. Yeah,
That's what you have?
that was on my question of when to put it on. Yeah,
Good. When to put it on.
Yeah.
Okay. That polarizing filter is going to come in really, really handy in landscape photography. I don't use it for anything else except landscape photography. But when I notice that there's glare on water, then I know that I'm going to use my polarizing filter. So I also wear polarized sunglasses. My eyes are very sensitive to the sun, so I've got polarized sunglasses. And anytime that I notice that I'm seeing a polarized effect, I know that my polarizer is going to work. So on your wide angle lens, and why you've got that LB thin, light bright thin, is so that we don't see the edge on our wide angle lens. And then lighter, brighter means that it's not cutting too much light, because it used to be a polarizing filter cut a lot of our light. So this Stingray polarizing filter is very thin, so we don't see its edges. And then it also doesn't cut a lot of our light. So in a scene like this in Boquillas Canyon in Big Bend, there was a lot of glare on the water. You can tell by the shadows here that I'm there in the middle of the day, which is the reality of sometimes when we are on location. We don't have a lot of choice sometimes when we're at different places. But when I screwed the polarizer on the front of the lens, and then you have to rotate the front element. And when you rotate the front element, you'll see the glare come on the water and the glare go off of the water. So as you rotate that front element, you'll see the glare come on and off the water. You'll also notice the sky go really, really blue and then kind of a whitish light blue. Be careful, especially in the desert environments or high altitudes, because if you rotate the filter too far, you'll almost get a solid black sky. And this really happens when we're at high altitudes or when we're in desert environments. So be careful, don't take it too far. So sometimes you got to back it off just a little bit. But this gives you, it gets rid of the glare off the water, so we don't have to deal with that. And then it makes that sky intense blue. The guy with the red t-shirt who wandered through the scene, remember I told you that the human eye goes to white first, and then it goes to the primary colors, reds, yellows, and blues. So anytime you can put somebody in your photograph wearing a yellow shirt or a red shirt or a blue shirt, they're going to look a heck of a lot more interesting. So when this guy goes strolling through my photograph with a red shirt on, I was ready for him. So he makes scale. So now you can see how tall those canyon walls are. The polarizer gets rid of the glare, and then luckily his nice shirt added to my photograph. So those polarizing filters get rid of that glare on the water, and they give you that beautiful, pristine blue sky. If you've got clouds in your sky, then your clouds are going to appear a lot whiter. And so this is a really good thing. So polarizer, the only time I use it is for landscape photography. So it's just a definite one. And it's on your handout, Raymond, since you don't own it, okay?
so like in this picture, when you were turning it, were you turning it for the sky or were you turning it for the water? I mean, what were you trying to?
I'm trying to get more of the glare off the water, because it was a pretty white glare on the water. And once I saw that by turning that polarizer filter, I could see the green muddy water, then that was a lot more appealing to me than a whole glare across the top of the water.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Kathy, would you use that filter like for sunrises? Is that too early in the day?
It's too early in the day unless I had some water that I really wanted to cut through. But most of the time, I think it's a little too early in the day.
So,
But then once the sun comes up, yeah, when we want to get rid of that glare off water, try the polarizer.
okay.
Yeah. Now this is your slow-mo filter, or your more slow filter by Stingray. And what this does is it cuts the light. So we've already gone to f32. We've already lowered our ISO. We've got as low of a shutter speed as we can actually get, but we're still not able to completely blur out the waves. So this is where you end up putting the more slow filter on. You can buy this in 10 stops, but you cannot see anything through your lens at all at 10 stops. So then you have to focus, not move the front of the lens, screw the filter on, hope that you didn't mess your focus up at all, and that you've already composed your scene, and then you end up sitting there for many, many minutes. So this is probably a 4-minute exposure, but it's not with the 10 stop. This is the 5 stop. So if you like doing this type of thing, I would suggest you not buy the 10 stop, but buy the 5 stop more slow. You're not going to use this very often. Again, you're going to use it when you're trying to completely obliterate crashing waves. So it's used for a certain effect. There's a guy named Steve Fisher who uses this on some of his Gulf Coast scenes, Rockport to Galveston, to smooth everything out, especially at sunrise and sunset. He does some phenomenal work when that water is just completely flat. It's really beautiful. So it's called more slow, but 5 stops. Learn from me. You don't need the 10 stop. And this shows you 5 stops when we've got the waves crashing out here. I kind of like it a little bit when we have some wave action as opposed to no wave action at all. Looks a little odd when there's absolutely no wave action, but sometimes people pull it off really, really well. Now, this is a filter you're not going to use that often. It's just going to stay in your bag. But if you're going any place where we've got some real good wave action, then you would use this. So this would be when you would pack it. So questions on those 3 filters?
Here's Kathy, I guess on the second one, the graduated neutral density filter.
Yeah.
When would you, I guess I realized the polarizer and the more slow, I missed that one, or somehow I got it.
No, and I just went by it. So
Oh, did you? Okay.
forgive me for that one. Okay. So this is the polarizer. So the graduated, let me see if I brought it in next. Yeah, here it is right here. Okay. I just put them in the wrong order on the program tonight.
Okay.
So the graduated filter. So this is a long rectangular filter. We have to have it in a certain holder so that we can slide it up and down. And it is smoky on the top and clear on the bottom. And what we use this for is to slide it down to the horizon so that we can block the exposure up on the sky and then keep the exposure down on the rocks. So in this Smoky Mountains photograph, I'm using the graduated neutral density filter. I'm sliding it down, and this is a soft edge graduated filter. I'm sliding it down to the horizon so you can't really see it. And then the exposure now has to be on manual because it has to be through the clear part on the bottom. So you get your exposure in manual exposure, dial in your f-stop, dial in your shutter speed. And then you have to go not manual focus, but manual exposure. And then when you slide your filter in, because it's darkening part of the sky, your light meter is going to be off. Don't readjust it because you've got it set for the foreground and you're letting the filter darken the sky. And then this is the type shot that you end up getting, but you just can't see that filter in there. And then here's where you can see a little bit more of the filter. So here you can't see much of it, and here you can see more of it. With the new cameras and with the new software, I am not using graduated filters anymore. And in fact, I sold them all. Because now I can make sure that the sky is perfectly exposed and I can bring out the foreground. In Iceland a couple of years ago, I was noticing the 18, 19, 20-year-old photographers running around with their cameras with their graduated neutral density filters in the holders, and they were just taking snaps everywhere they went. But that means that they didn't understand how they were using it, because you have to raise the filter up, get your exposure, put your filter back into place, and take your picture. So this isn't a filter that you just leave on the camera like a polarizer. So when you notice that they don't even know how they're using it, how to use this filter, then you wonder what kind of pictures they're getting anyway. But, you know, that's just the old fuddy-duddy and me looking down at them. So I don't own a graduated filter, but some photographers that I know that do a lot of landscape photography, they are still using their graduated filters. And I'm now just using what I can get, because we have a graduated filter now in Lightroom and Photoshop products. And I'm just exposing for the sky and then bringing out the foreground. There are also graduated color filters out there. Same thing, they're a long rectangle and you slide them in and out depending on where you want your color. So you can do this as a physical filter out in the field, or we can do this later on in Lightroom or Photoshop. So I'm now doing this all later on in Lightroom or Photoshop. And once again, I've sold all of my filters for this. So questions before we leave filters?
I was just say, plus it sounds very complicated, so.
It's slow. It's very slow. Yes, yes, it's very slow. And it was the only way we could do it for years. And in the film days, it was the only way we could do it. But we've got tools now that I would much prefer to do this later on in software. Questions on filters? But definitely the polarizer. You definitely want to use the polarizer. We cannot do that later on in any software later on. So definitely use your polarizer. And then I also suggest with your landscape photography that you give yourself a project. And as you all have seen who've been to my master classes, you know, I give you these homework assignments and you have to go out and beat your head against a wall and try to come back with a, you know, a photo that you can show to the rest of the class. It's the same thing if you give yourself a project. And as you're working on becoming a better landscape photographer, give yourself a project. And I'll show you one of mine. I've been working on this project of minimal foreground in blue. So I've been working on this for the last, come on, you can change slides. Come on. So I've been working on this for a couple of years now. Blue just happens to be one of my favorite colors. And so I'm working on these minimal landscapes all done in blue. And, you know, it's just the color of blue. That's all there is to it. And it's kind of this thing that, that I'm working on. And so I encourage you to do the same thing, of to give yourself a project. And your project might be the same place photographed throughout the entire year. So Lynette, you've got that pond in the back of your property. So that might end up being the same pond for the entire year, or maybe Darlene, a river that's near you in the hill country, or you're on the lake. So you could even do the lake during, you know, all the year. So give yourself a project that you can work on and challenge you just a little bit to come up with this kind of portfolio of different landscape scenes. So just something to stimulate you just a little bit. And then panoramics, these are a neat thing. So how many of y'all tried panoramics?
On my phone.
On your phone?
Yeah, on my
Okay.
phone. Yeah, that's it. I'm
Yeah,
like,
me too.
Okay, okay. The phone is just totally cheated, not cheated, but the phone has introduced us to panoramics. And so with your panoramic photography, this can really help you because sometimes the scene is much wider than we can photograph. So for a panoramic, I've given you on your handout the method that I use. And it is simply turning your camera vertical, and you can use any lens you want. You can use a telephoto lens, you can use a wide angle lens, you can use your medium telephoto lens. You turn your camera vertical and you focus on someplace in the middle foreground. So someplace kind of close, but far off at the same time. F8 works really well because then you don't get any long exposures. But if you've got enough sunlight, don't worry about it. Do F32, turn your camera vertical. And now we're going to take 2 to 20 overlapping photographs. I've done as many as 120, just being goofy. So I did not only overlapping going across, but I did a second layer overlapping and a third layer overlapping. So that was my 120 photographs. But the key is to do this. And if you would look down at your toes, look down at your feet. Okay. So we're going to hold our camera vertical directly over our toes. And we're going to move our toes all the way with our body 90 degrees. And now moving your toes, not your waist, but moving your toes, we're going to go click, 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 click as we rotate around. If you keep your camera right over your toes, you get a straight line. Okay. If you bend at the waist, you get a U. And so this is a simple, I stand up and I move my feet to 90 degrees to the left. And then I just move my toes all the way around and I keep the camera straight in front, right over my toes. And I just click, 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 click. You don't even have to use a tripod.
So you just take a series of pictures and you just have your finger and the shutter and just.
That's all you do. And so this is about 15 pictures. And by the way, you can do this walking down a road. So you don't have to do it in a circle. So if you need to, you can actually walk down a road. Just keep the camera right over your toes the whole time. So you can do that if you want to. So this is about 15 or 20 photographs. And the reason I did it as a panoramic is because the rainbow was not in any place halfway interesting. But if I did it as a panoramic, now it looks interesting. So a panoramic is our way that we can get that wonderful grand landscape. So here's a click, 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 click. And then you put it all together and it becomes a panoramic. And it's big and it's grand. And you didn't notice that. But if I did that with one lens, it wouldn't be as big and as grand.
How you stitch it together?
You stitch it together in Lightroom or Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw. And what's beautiful is we just load all the pictures in, we bring them into Adobe Camera Raw, or you can do it over in Lightroom if you want to. You highlight them all, you pull down the little tab and you say panoramic and it does it.
That's
Wow.
Yes.
That would have been awesome at Zermatt.
And that's what you need. And it's beautiful. So even if it's just 2 pictures or 3 pictures, it doesn't have to be 20 pictures, depending on what you're trying to photograph. But it gives us this ability to get big. And that's panoramics.
Okay.
And this is what happens if you bend at the waist.
Okay, yeah.
So if you bend at the waist, you get a U. And now when you try to crop that, then it's not going to work. Except there is this new feature in Photoshop, if you blend it in Photoshop, called Content Aware Fill. And it will go fill in all of this gap with content aware information. And it does a pretty darn good, it does a pretty darn good job. But if you photograph it the right way the first time around, then you don't have to worry about content aware fill. So that's a panoramic. So click, 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 click. So that we can get that beautiful grand landscape that we're looking for. And here's another panoramic. So just when it's big and you want to be able to show it big.
Kathy, I guess the advantage of a panoramic versus just using a super wide angle, you don't get the distortion. Then
You got it. You got it. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Now you've got to think about like a scene like this. Make sure you don't cut the mountain off by the time you get over there. So
Right.
you kind of got to think
You gotta
about where
pull that
you're
stuff out.
starting. Yeah. 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 But it's the distortion. And you can do this inside. You can do this in a big cathedral, or you can do this in a big interior museum. So you can do panoramas anywhere.
Okay.
And they can go all the way around. You can do a 360. So just like you do with your cell phone,
Okay.
they're good. And then this is HDR, high dynamic range. So Raymond, you were talking about bracketing your exposure.
Yes.
And then if you didn't move your camera and you didn't move it on the tripod and you didn't change your focus point, then you can blend that as a high dynamic range.
Okay.
So this shot, for instance, excuse me, go back to this one. This shot, for instance, is 7 shots, 1 perfectly exposed, 1 underexposed, 2 stops underexposed, 1 stop overexposed, 2 stops overexposed. You can set your camera for this. So it's called exposure bracketing if you're a Canon user, and I'm not sure exactly what Nikon calls it. Come on, there we go. This is an HDR. So this is just holding the camera and pushing the button, and it takes 5 exposures for me. So I go in on the back of the camera and I set it under exposure bracketing to do one stop each way, starting at 0. And then it just takes 5 pictures for me. It doesn't blend it because blending it in the camera doesn't look very good. We're going to blend this later on. And so this is because of the sunrise coming up in the far distance, the fog in the mist in the valley, and then the foreground. I wanted this to be an HDR. So this is a 7-shot exposure. So you can do 5 shots or 7 shots. This is in the Texas Hill Country. So this is a 5-shot exposure. Just trying to get everything all the way through, all the detail, all the way in. This is an HDR. I think it's the Medina River, if I'm not mistaken, or the Frio River. I'm sorry, Frio River. So this is a 5-shot exposure. And then to blend these, Lightroom and Photoshop do an okay job, but not a spectacular job. So to blend them, I like Aurora, or I like Nick. So, and Topaz would also do a really good job. So I just don't think that the Adobe products do a very good job. So I like blending my HDRs in Aurora or Nick or Topaz, depending on which one you have. Questions on HDR?
Kathy, is there a limit? I mean, I know one time I tried to photo stack and it exceeded my capacity of.
Yeah. Now, remember, you're not stacking in HDR.
Okay.
So in HDR, what it's doing is it's because you've done 2 stops over all the way to 2 stops under, it's going in and it's pulling out all those dark pixels and replacing them with the better pixels from the other photo.
Okay.
So, and then it's getting rid of all your white pixels and replacing it with the sky.
Okay. Okay.
So it goes a little bit faster
Okay.
in a stack. Yeah, some of that, like when we were doing focus stacking, yeah,
Right.
that can tax your computer. Yes,
It did.
it did. It does, and it did. And then here's this other thing called color grading. Okay, so color grading is, if you think about this concept of go back to your color wheel, just vision a color wheel in your head. Colors across from each other on the color wheel go best. So that's your blues and your yellows, for instance, and your reds and your greens, any of your sports colors. So when we talk about the color wheel, those colors directly across from each other look best. You can go in to your photo using color grading in either Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, and you can choose the colors so that we get those blues and those golds in this case to look good together. Color grading can also go in and allow you to change the coloration of the photograph. So this picture looked pretty good. This is a one shot photo. It looked pretty good, but it looked a whole lot better when the shadows became a bit purple. So purple and gold go well together. You know, we get that from your sports teams as well. So color grading allows us to change the highlight color and the shadow color to give us a little different look. So that's color grading. Pull out a landscape photograph, and the next time you can play for a little while in your Adobe product and go to color grading and start playing around, you'll see what I mean. So color grading. You see how the shadows in this picture are blue? You see that? Does everybody notice? So shadows over here are just blue. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to go to my color grading right here. And on these little circles, one's a midpoint, one's a shadow, and one's a highlight. And I decided only to play around with the midtones and the shadows to make my shadows a little less blue and a little more balanced with my grass. And I didn't play around with my highlights on this one. So I went from that blue cast, y'all see, to that cast right there. So from the blue cast to the other. Did that change on your screens? Can y'all see it?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this is subtle.
Yeah, it was subtle. Yeah.
It's very subtle. But then we've got this thing called calibration. And calibration has changed because if you took if you took my introduction to Adobe Camera Raw, calibration was used for one thing, but we're now using it for another thing. And so calibration now is where we can now get the red, and we can click on the red, and under the red we get the saturation, the luminance, and the hue, and we can now change the red tones. So there's not a lot of red tones in this photograph, but in those brown rocks there are some red tones, and in that moss in the foreground there are some red tones. And then by changing the reds and the greens and the blues, I can go from this photo to, whoops, sorry, go back to that photo. So I can go from that to that. from that to that. And you notice I also took the rock on the left out. And I did that with the clone stamp because that rock kept drawing my eye away from the waterfall. But what I've done, watch the shadows on the right. So originally the shadows were a little bit on the dark side, and now I have opened the shadows up just a bit. And I just noticed something. I have no idea what it is. I did something wrong right there. I left something showing. So I did something in there. I need to go back in and fix that photo somewhere. So this is called calibration. And this is where you go into the photo and you can change the red, greens, and blues. I prefer color mixer. So color mixer is where you go to color mixer and you have about 12 colors that you can work with. Red, orange, burnt orange, yellow, green, aqua, turquoise, purple. You know, you've got several colors that you can work with. And each one of those colors, you can do hue, saturation, or luminance. Saturation is the gaudy one. Luminance is the toned down that people won't notice. So photo of the Guadalupe over on the left was what I did, just basic processing. Photograph of the Guadalupe over on the right is where I went in and I made the greens a little greener. And then I made the golds a little golder and the reds a little redder. And then that shine, that blue shine on the river, I made it a little bit more aqua. And a lot of landscape photographers are doing this now. And sometimes in photo contests, I'll just look at the winners and say, I have never seen light look like that in my entire life. And that's because we didn't. That's not the way it looked. But this color mixer gives us the ability to just go in and change just that color in that photograph. So especially as we start coming into autumn, if you wish that those colors were just a little more yellow or a little more orange or a little more red, this is your way that you can boost those colors without changing the whole color in the entire scene. So the trunks of the cypress trees, I didn't change. It's only the water and the leaves that have been changed. So this is called color mixer. And it's useful on birds. It's useful on a lot of other things. So it's a useful skill for you to learn. And you can see how to do it. Just move the sliders back and forth. If you don't like what it did, then just move everything back to 0. This is the Rio Celeste down in Costa Rica. It's a turquoise river. And the photo over on the left is just basic old ordinary processing, just like I would usually do with my sliders, textures, vibrant, saturation, you know, basic old ordinary sliders. But then the turquoise river wasn't as turquoise as I wanted it to be. And so the one over on the right is only playing with the turquoise color to bring that out just a little bit more.
So Kathy, when you do the color mixer, do you do the whole image? Just move your sliders and it does everything on that image, or do you have to select the area that you want to focus on?
You don't have to select the area. When you move the slider for turquoise, it only changes the turquoise color.
Okay.
And when you move the slider for green, it only changes the green color. And you've got 3 different options: the hue of the green, the saturation of the green, or the luminance of the green. Luminance is kind of undertones, saturation's gaudy high tones, and the hue is where we can actually change the hue.
Okay.
So it's a real subtle coloration, and you don't notice it too much unless you point it out to somebody.
Right. Okay.
When do you use saturation then?
Saturation's where I really want to bring that color out. But you've got to watch it, because if you if you do too much saturation, you almost get puddles of color
Okay.
instead of subtle. Yeah. But, you know, if you really wanted to accentuate, like, you know, a kitten's blue eyes, then you could use saturation and just make those eyes blue. So it helps. It's interesting. So here's the finished photo. And then there are other computer plays that we can do also, just playing around with computers. And does anybody own Nick or Topaz or Luminar? Anybody own any of those?
No.
No.
No? No, okay. So there is something to be said for some of these software programs. So for instance, this was a really cool sunset, okay? Just looks great. But move it into Nick, color effects, detail extractor. It's my favorite thing in Nick. So I go from that, which is pretty nice, to that. So this is called detail extractor. And what it does is it just kind of oomphs the texture up on things. When I looked at this scene, no color in it, dull, you know, overcast, but these kind of funky little clouds. I immediately thought I can bring this into Nick. I can strip out the color and just leave a little bit. And then I can pull all those clouds out in detail extractor. So this is the color effects in Nick, and it's called detail extractor. But now it makes all those rocks and that cactus and everything, it just like pulls it out. So sometimes I can look at a scene and I can know immediately what I'm going to do. So this is what came out of the camera. And this is detail extractor. This is what came out of the camera. And this is detail extractor.
So Kathy, did you process it all like in Camera Raw or whatever? And then at the very end, you took it to Nick?
Correct. Correct.
So of those three that you said, Nick and what were the other two?
Nick and Topaz and Luminar.
Which one do you think you use the most?
Probably because I know how to use Nick, and I've been using Nick since the beginning.
Okay.
But I suspect there's the same thing in Topaz, same thing in Luminar.
Okay.
And they're all plugins. So they just go right from your Adobe Camera Raw into this.
Okay.
But it's that ability to know that I'm going to be able to pull out those rain clouds off on that horizon in detail extractor. So yeah, I can't see it. I can't see it real well. Raymond, you were probably getting some of those rays coming off a half dome.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that's those crepuscular rays. We're going to make those things look really, really good in detail extractor. Yeah, and it's just great. So this whole scene right here in Iceland, when I saw it, I knew immediately this was going to be a detail extractor. And so this is just, you know, the whole foreground I exposed for the sky, the whole foreground is dark. Use my shadow slider on the foreground, process it out, take it into color effects, Nick, use that detail extractor. And now I could see every nook and cranny of every single one of those clouds up in the sky. And so it's good stuff. It's really good stuff. And we, you know, I didn't even see all this stuff with my eye. But if you just know that now I can take it into software and do this, and I've got the potential for it. So all of those crepuscular rays that we have in sunsets and sunrises and in storm clouds, you move those into Nick and pull that detail out. And it's amazing. So landscape photography is getting the basics right. Get your composition right. Think about your composition and how you're going to move your viewer's eye around the frame. And then also start pulling in some of these other little tricks and things from software programs and panoramas and HDRs. Starts opening up a beautiful world of landscape photography. Okay, questions? Anything I didn't touch upon?
Kathy, when you gonna like HDR?
Yeah.
So if you're gonna, I guess, do you process each image first?
Mm.
No, you just let the software do the work. Same thing with a panoramic. You don't.
Panoramic, the same thing. We don't process that unless it's like I need to bring out the shadows, but then we're going to do them as a batch so that you bring the shadows out the same way.
Okay.
Because if you don't get it matching, then it's not going to match in the software.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions?
So you essentially only crop in the picture itself. I mean, you do your crop in your head before you ever take the picture.
I'm trying. Yes, yes. And I'll either walk or I'll change lenses. So I'm trying not to crop.
Yeah.
Now, you know, birds, we've got to crop, and macro, sometimes we've got to crop. Flowers, we've got to crop. But in landscape, you noticed I didn't even mention it. So I hadn't even thought about it until you said something, but I try not to crop if I don't have to. Now, I do have to straighten the horizon because I get my horizon crooked. So I do have to straighten my horizon, and that means I do have to crop for that. What else? So coming up tomorrow night, bird photography, if you haven't taken that already. And then basic, if you know anybody who needs the basic photography, it's coming up on the 26th. That's a two-night class. And the night photography master class is coming up on the 17th. That's a 4-night class over a 4-week period with homework. And then the textures master class is coming up on the 23rd. Same thing. That's a 4-week class with homework. I think Darlene and Lynette, you all that you've done textures, right?
I need to take the
No,
basic class again.
No, you don't. You got it. You got it.
I'm afraid to take the class that it would be over my head, but
Oh.
I'm interested with the texture class.
Okay. No, you're ready for textures. Yeah, you're ready. Yeah. And then Raymond,
Okay.
you're signed up for textures, right?
I am, and I haven't taken any textures class, so
Okay.
I'm just gonna be brave.
You're going to be brave and dive in there. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good way to learn layers. So you'll learn layers in the textures class. And
Okay.
then coming up in February, if you want to travel with me, Costa Rica, new itinerary. Romania, you saw some pictures from Romania tonight. Romania is an incredible country. I'm going there in May, but it's for birds in the Danube Delta. And then the extension goes up into the mountains of Transylvania. So we get to go up into Transylvania, and then England's coming up in June of 2020. And then Lynette, you were asking about Norway. That's in September, I think, of 2020.
I want to see the Aurora Borealis
Oh, it is amazing.
on my bucket list.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Okay, questions from any of you all?
Can I ask you one on hummingbirds?
You can.
Kathy, do you shoot your hummingbirds on a tripod or just freehand it just really fast?
Free-handed really fast.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I did that last weekend at Rockport. I got a few good pictures.
Yeah. Now there's times, Darlene was with me last month when we were in the hill country for hummingbirds. And there's times when the hummingbirds coming back to the same feeder over and over and over again. And that's a good thing sometimes, just to be on a tripod for that, because then you've got less movement going on.
Yeah. I was on a feeder and they kept coming back to it over and over, and they were just hovering off to
Yeah.
the side, and I was just shooting them as they were away from the feeder itself. So.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I did freehand. I didn't try my tripod. I thought it'd be just a little chaotic.
Did you get good results?
I did. The eye was not as sharp as I was hoping. The color was good. I got pretty good depth of field on them. I was probably F8, F11,
Mhm.
but the eye wasn't as sharp as I was hoping it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard. That's hard. And Lynette, is your buff bellied still there?
No, but you know what? That is the most photographic hummingbird I've ever had to photograph.
Yeah.
I sat right underneath it and didn't bother him. He just pranced around and showed his colors, and I was just so ecstatic to be
Yeah.
able to do that. See all the colors on his neck, and oh, I mean, I couldn't get a bad picture even if I
Yeah.
tried.
He's a beauty and he's big. Yeah. And it's nice. It
Yes,
just sits
yes,
there.
it stayed for about 3 days maybe.
Mm, very good.
And when everybody wanted to come on Saturday, of course he was gone.
Of course. Always. Always.
So, but yes, he was a very, I'll say, he didn't mind anyone. Just, I was right underneath him or right in front of him, about what, 3 feet?
Mhm.
And it would just sit there
Wow.
guarding his little feeder.
Yeah.
He's got a little perch. He'd go to the feeder and then he'll perch right on top and just stay there. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter whether you're there with your long lens or whatever.
Mhm,
He
mhm.
just sat there. It was
Yep.
really great.
They're good. They're good. Okay, guys, any other questions?
Thank you. It was
Just
great
need to
again.
practice.
Great.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. Okay,
you.
I
Thank you,
will,
Kathy.
you are welcome. I will share the recording. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to share the recording with you all tomorrow. And then you all can watch it. Thanks for reminding me, Dave, to record. Okay.
No problem.
Okay.
Or reminding again